Hello and welcome to Bedrock's third panel discussion with educators this academic year. So we've got implementation excellence, creating language-rich communities. We thought as a team at Bedrock that is essentially what all of us aim for in schools, is to create language-rich communities and to boost that confidence and enable all students to fulfill their potential. So I'm really looking forward to having these discussions with our guests today. So we've got Charlotte Parkins from Middlewich High School. Would you like to sort of introduce yourself? What's your role? What's your general context? Where is Middlewich? And then we'll go from there. Oh, I think you're on mute. I'll come back to Charlotte, that's fine. We'll go on to Sophie. We're just talking that Sophie can actually hear the sea from where she is. So Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Sophie. I'm at Crofton School down in Stubbington in the south of Hampshire. I'm second in department for English, and I've taken on the sort of role of looking after literacy and pushing that across the school. And we've really loved Bedrock and had loads of success with it so far, so I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, great, thank you. And Ellie, I'm very excited to introduce Ellie. She was pretty much in your position, in all the teachers' position this time last year, and now she is at Bedrock as a senior specialist, English specialist. So Ellie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I was head of English and also dabbled with some of the literacy coordinator stuff as my role in a secondary school in Leeds. And then, I joined Bedrock in September and have been loving seeing it from the other side and having some influence over what we're doing at Bedrock. So it's nice to be able to see it from both sides as well.
Thank you. I think Leanne and Charlotte have had a few issues with technology, so we will keep going and hopefully they will rejoin us. Here we go. Charlotte, hello.
I can't mute myself. If I mute myself, it goes off.
That's absolutely fine. We'll keep you unmuted from now on. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry guys for the delay. I have a school laptop and it wouldn't let me access. So I am Charlotte Parkins. I'm head of English at Middlewich High School, which is in Cheshire East. And I'm also strategic lead for teaching and learning, seconded to SLT across the whole of the school. Brand new, not brand new, I've been doing head of department for a year. Bedrock has been my responsibility before that. So it was something that was under my wing before I became head of department. And it's just something that I've continued to push since taking on the head of department role.
Great, thanks. And I've had some really interesting discussions with each of you over the last few weeks. So it'd been really nice to sort of unpack lots of that with each of you. So just to get some sort of context of where we are and why, creating language-rich communities is really important. This was from a while ago, but I think the word mastery has really stuck, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but a mastery of literacy, whether it's reading, writing or the spoken language, is vital in ensuring best outcomes for all students in all areas of the curriculum. I think we're all on that same page in terms of the purpose, but it'd be interesting to hear, how you are ensuring that our students have a mastery of literacy. So we'll start off with Charlotte. So hopefully the mic is going to work again. But why are you committed to creating language-rich communities? So, what's your demographic? What's your context? And why is it going to have a huge impact on your students if that is something you focus on?
So I think I'd start by saying, if you were to come to Middlewich, if anyone has ever been there, you initially come and you think, well, it looks like an affluent area, this looks almost like a middle class area. I certainly thought that when I first came there, but the demographic is very different, and we have students who we have a high percentage of SEN students. We are well sought after school because of our inclusive nature. We have hearing impaired students. We actually have a girl who is deaf and blind at the moment that we accommodate. So we have a mixture of needs and requirements, and then our PP students as well. So the demographic cries out for it, and it's a very insular town, Middlewich. You're kind of born there, you live there, you die there, as awful as that sounds. So our students aren't very aspirational. They don't look beyond kind of the remits of what Middlewich or the Cheshire East area can do for them. So that aspiration feeds into the fact that actually when they come into school, they're not always pushing themselves, and they don't seek to narrow their own gap in knowledge and their own gap in learning. And we see that gap widening. And we know that, you know, Boris Johnson did his announcement, didn't he, about literacy levels and how the effect of COVID on literacy levels. But literacy is something that has been going on for as long, you know, as we can say. I've been teaching for 12 years, and it's been a buzzword ever since I first started teaching. But I think becoming a mum, and my son is 3 in January, I started to realise that the gap starts a lot earlier than that. And I actually went to his nursery and had a meeting with them to talk about literacy there. And actually, when we look at the gap in students, the average gap is 22 months. And if you think about that, that starts from a nursery age. So by the time they get to us, we are, you know, we're combating something that's been a problem, a lifelong issue. And it's about how we make it important to them, and how we make them realize that it's not just about passing an exam, it's about a lifelong thing. So we're committed to it as a school because we are very much committed to a knowledge-rich curriculum. We're very much committed to the fact that these students are being sent out into a world where, regardless of technology, regardless of anything that's advancing, language is at the foundation of it all. And if we don't narrow that gap, and if we don't get them past that step, we're failing them. Never mind what they get on a GCSE paper, we are not empowering them for life. And you know, and that's something we're really breeding across our school.
Fantastic. Yeah. And actually, I don't know whether we mentioned last time when you were talking about your 3-year-old, and I've got a 2-year-old who's coming up to 2. Emotional literacy, just as much as that sort of attainment and progress, is being able to express themselves, and that has a real knock-on effect on behaviour as well as sort of their aspirations beyond school gates.
We see a strong correlation at Middlewich, and I'm sure there's a few of you that will say the same thing, between our low reading ages, and we do have some really low reading ages of like age 7, and behavioural issues, because we all know that if a student can't access what is happening in the classroom, their default setting is to misbehave, because that will mask the fact that they don't know. That will mask the fact that they can't read it, or they don't know what these words mean. And for some of them, the embarrassment of not knowing what it is in front of them, they want to squash that. So they think, right, well, they don't obviously make the conscious choice, but in their brain, it's fight or flight, isn't it? So I'm going to misbehave because that's going to detract away from the fact that I actually don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this focus on mastery of literacy is going to boost their confidence in every aspect. Yeah. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Moving on to Sophie, it'd be interesting to sort of hear more about your context.
So it's quite interesting in listening to Charlotte to hear that we've got quite a similar demographic. From the outside, it would appear that Stubbington is quite an affluent area, and then actually the cohort of students that we take in is varying drastically. And our sort of journey with creating that language-rich community within our school started a couple of years back, and it was something we were working on as we approached lockdown. And we realised that sort of that cultural capital of literacy amongst our students was differing substantially, and we knew that there were things that we could do to work on it. And it was something that we started on within the English department. And then in returning sort of sporadically between the lockdowns, we realised that that gap had been exacerbated exactly as we'd all expected it to. And that's where we found Bedrock Learning, because we can do everything we can in our classroom, and it was something that we started as an English department rather than as a literacy focus, and it was having a great impact. But as soon as those students leave the classroom, they no longer have that emotional literacy, they can no longer express themselves, they don't have the level of oracy required. So it's something that we realised we didn't just have a responsibility for within our own classrooms, but something that we've got that responsibility to do across the school as well. Because ultimately, exactly as Charlotte has said, we're not just here for those students to make sure that we get them an exam grade. We want those students to be able to express themselves. And if they come to us from a disadvantaged sort of cultural capital sense, we need to be the ones to make sure that we improve that for them.
Excellent. Actually, that kind of connects to the idea of empowering them as well. So yeah, it'll be really exciting to sort of move on and talk about the strategies you guys have put in place. But before then, Ellie, did you want to add anything to this in terms of, you know, context of where you've worked in the past and you know, going forward?
Yeah, so very similar to both of you. So I worked in a city school in Leeds where we had over 50% of the students were pupil premium, and my last year 7 cohort, we had 60% of the children had a reading age of below 10. So massive gaps in their literacy and real struggle in communicating the most simple ideas, and that was something that was across the whole school in every cohort, which again we experienced widening over the sort of lockdown period. And the OUP say it's like 24 months in Leeds by the time you leave primary school, so very, very similar. And which is what sort of led me onto Bedrock, to make sure that actually that language rich community could be spread across more schools than just sort of the one school.
Yeah, no, and it's just, yeah, it's really interesting to sort of hear all of these sides. And actually, when we're thinking about the strategies that you guys have put in place, it'd be interesting to hear more about the reading and the writing and speaking, listening. But just to like look at that context, because lockdown has been raised a couple of times. We don't want to dwell on it, obviously, but it is good to see where we're at and how we can move forward. And you mentioned the context of Leeds, but you know, nationwide, the gap currently between persistently disadvantaged students and their peers is 22 months. There had been gains made. They were very slow gains. It would have taken 30 years if we kept at that rate to close the attainment gap. But all those gains have almost been lost over lockdown, sadly. So there is work to do, if not for the attainment, but also for students' well-being and life beyond school. And just to sort of bring back some of the awful headlines that came up, but one that really stood out, and actually Alex Quigley responded to in his blog, was Boris Johnson fears lockdown illiteracy surge, and that became sort of a word that people were referring to as surge of illiteracy. And you know, how are we going to combat that? So thinking positively and about proactive things that you guys are doing, what have you put in place, Charlotte, to create that language rich school that you know that we all want?
So what I would say is this has been years, I think, in the making. And I think I go back to what I said at the beginning, that literacy has always been this buzzword. And I think when I started teaching, I don't know if anyone can relate, which I said was 12 years ago, literacy was a fad. It was a gimmick. It was edutainment. You know, how can we add this on? I think some of it has precedent, you know, word of the week and things if you do it well. But it was these kind of gimmicks that we could do whole school to just raise the profile of literacy without actually narrowing the gap. It didn't really do much. We didn't see the outcome of it. So we actually, I think, subscribed to Bedrock, I want to say at least 5 years ago. And we never quite got there with it. We never quite did what we needed to do. And we knew it was something that was important to us. And we knew that it would help us, but we didn't know how to do it in the best possible way. So from an English perspective, and if I'm bringing it back to Bedrock, we do Bedrock with our year 7, 8 and 9 year groups, and it's their home learning. So they do it at home. And they are required to do 2 lessons of Bedrock a week, and this is checked every Monday morning, and it's something that I actually check. I go on every single report, and I stringently check everything, and that's done at 8:30 on a Monday morning. And any student that hasn't done their home learning is issued with a home learning catch-up. Now, at the beginning of the year in September, we had over 100 students each week on home learning catch-up. So you can imagine the admin around that, because we're expected to do all of that ourselves. This week and last week we have between 30 and 40, so we've over halved that, and that is just through being tenacious with it and really raising our expectation and letting students know that it's not acceptable. And on our most recent Bedrock report, our monthly usage report, we had an 85% usage, which is the best we've ever had. And I compared it to May's report yesterday, and it's incredible. But it's also raising the profile of literacy whole school. So I think what goes hand in hand with what we've been doing with the home learning is the fact that on our Key Stage 3 timetable, we all designate 1 hour a fortnight for a Bedrock lesson. Now that Bedrock lesson is in class and it has its own schemes of work. So we follow the blocks from Bedrock, we follow the words from Bedrock. We start from the very first, so blocks that potentially some students won't ever access because they are pitched higher, and we do literacy tasks around them. So we use our reading strategies, we use our diagrams to explore words, we use dual coding, all of our teaching and learning strategies within those lessons. And I'd be more than happy to share some of those examples with anybody that would want to see them. And it's been, you know, it's been really powerful because you show the students that there is a bridge between home learning and school, that they are not separate entities, that they feed into one another. So the students thrive off that. We obviously we're on it with the home learning, and then our whole school approach to a language rich community. We have a whole school literacy, and the lead on that is Emma Grant, who is assistant head teacher. She was the head of English that I took over from, and she is very much on the same page as me that it's not a fad. Literacy is quality first teaching. So we've empowered our staff with key strategies to try around literacy within their own areas, and it's about them realizing that we are all responsible for creating a language rich community. It's not just about the English department. It always falls on the English department, but it's not. And when you get them to think, I sat with the head of PE and he opened this textbook up and I highlighted every word that I think a child would struggle with. And he was blown back by it. He couldn't believe that there was that many words. We've empowered all of our staff with reading ages. So since lockdown, the result of lockdown, we now do star reading. I don't know if anybody else does star reading. And it gives us our reading ages. And we have that now on Sims. So every single teacher can see the reading age of a child. And what we're trying to get them to understand is if a child has a reading age of age 7, they cannot access what you are trying to teach them in the classroom. Your lesson essentially needs to be turned into literacy focus around reading and writing and unpicking those words. That is the best thing you can do for that child. And when I did a recent learning walk, it was really pleasing to see lots of those strategies taking place in lots of subject areas. Is it perfect? No. Do we need to improve? Absolutely. And, it's constantly something that we're striving for. Something that we've done more recently is we did some training with the primary school and phonics. I'm a secondary school teacher. I have never had to look at phonics. My child is not old enough yet to understand phonics. I have no comprehension of any of it. It's like a different language to me. But it was really empowering speaking to our feeder primary, Middlewich Primary, and we spoke about how they do it, and it's actually quite surprising how early they stop phonics at primary school. So we're looking at using Ruth Miskin. I'm not sure if anybody else uses Ruth Miskin, and we're going to test some of our lower readers around their phonics, because what we're seeing is that they can decode, and they might have the prosody, so they might be able to read it out loud, but they can't comprehend what they're reading, or vice versa. So we're bringing that prosody in to most of our lessons, and again creating that language rich community. And I heard the word oracy from Sophie. I've always been a naysayer around getting students to read out loud. I'm always terrified of creating a culture of fear, and I don't want to create a culture of fear. But we do use no opt-out, and we do use cold calling as strategies with teaching and learning. So the head teacher said to me, why don't you do reading out loud? So I've started doing more of it recently because of the research around prosody and reading out loud and comprehension. And we are bringing that into our scholarly behaviours, and students are really enjoying doing the prosody side of it. And I think something else that we're moving on to, we have nurture groups. Again, I don't know if anybody else has this in their school. We have our e-groups, and we're looking, they've always followed our curriculum. They do the same thing. So we do Greek myths with year 7, and the 7E group still do Greek myths. But we're looking at how we make that scheme of work literacy focused without losing the knowledge. And I'm practicing that at the minute because we've got a year 10 and a year 11 group who don't do languages because their reading ages are so low, and they were doing step up to English, but it's not what we need. It's not fitting what we need, and we need it to be a bridge, really, these 5 hours a fortnight to their English language GCSE, so that they get a grade 1. So they are actually starting a new curriculum in January, which is called the Epc Curriculum, which is Enhanced Provision Curriculum, which I am writing, which is 5 hours a fortnight. 2 of those hours are going to be spent on reading intervention, and we're not shying away from difficult texts. We're still doing 1930s interwar texts. We're using Mary Poppins, ironically, and we are getting them to do some reading in these intervention lessons, a bit of prosody. So we've picked extracts that they can all have a go at reading out and thinking about where their intonation would change, and then comprehension. So they do that twice over the fortnight, and then the other 3 lessons are based on bridging the gap with our English language, looking at that language rich, so unpicking words like dilapidated. That word comes up all the time. We know it comes up all the time, but have we ever unpicked it with these children for them to understand it? So we've got a lot going on. That's just a snapshot, really, but we are, really pushing the fact that it is a community, not just English on its own little island trying to burrow away with literacy. Is everybody working together cohesively so that these students come to different lessons and they understand their vocab. And I think I'd end with this. A young girl in year 8 told her history teacher yesterday, "Oh, miss, I've been learning about words around colonialism in my Bedrock." And just having that connection, as it's really powerful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, so much, to unpick there. I mean, a recent seminar I went to with Alex Quigley was on reading fluency and how that can really support your disciplinary literacy across the school. So it's really, really great that that's a focus. And in terms of showing your PE teacher like all those tier 2 words that are going to crop up, I often look at the PE exam papers. They're really tricky. They've got really technical language in there. So it's a really good way to raise awareness and things amongst all staff and the whole community. Thanks, Charlotte. Sophie, so what strategies have you got in place, and how are you supporting creating a language-rich community at your school?
So it's really nice to follow on from Charlotte from this, because I want to reiterate exactly the same thing. Our focus was making sure that this wasn't just an English department strategy. It was a whole school literacy initiative that was going to benefit students cross-curricularly, which Bedrock does so well. We started with a literacy focus on reading quite a few years back, where we looked at the STAR reading tests. We were using Accelerated Reader to try and monitor reading ages and make sure that we were creating recommended reading lists that would support students with their sort of wider reading around the subject, but also exposing them to a slightly greater variety of fiction than what they would pick up. And from that, we thought about the literacy that they are being given in the key texts that we study and in the short stories that we study. So then during lockdown, when we started having time to reflect on this a little bit more, we as staff members within English were going through the key texts that we were expecting students to read, and we were highlighting keywords and creating tier 2 word slides for that. So we'd use a couple of different models, the Freya model, or just taking a look at a basic etymology model. And we would break down that word into a really simple dual coded slide that would explain exactly what that word was. And that was something that we'd then use as a flipped learning activity during lockdown. So prior to the live lessons, students were getting that sort of literacy input, but it did feel like we were missing the mark. So we tried to expand those tier 2 word slides, and we spoke to departments within the school. And rather than using pre-designated lists off of the internet, we asked them for the keywords that they use most often in their teaching and in their schemes of work. And we created a huge bank of tier 2 slide resources, and we asked staff to embed them within their schemes of work across the school. And that was fantastic where it worked, but we still thought that it wasn't quite hitting the benchmark. It was very difficult to monitor whether or not that was being used cross-curricularly, and whether every student in every class was getting that equitable experience of that literacy within their subject. So we looked to Bedrock, and we created a literacy team and a tutor team that take responsibility with their students in either their tutor groups, their classes, and in their department areas. So while we as English teachers have the sort of forefront admin on it, everybody has access to it and everybody has that responsibility within their department. So within our literacy team, we have a member from each department, and they volunteered to be the pioneer for their department on literacy. And we've also got volunteers from each of our year group teams. And the reason that we've got the year group teams involved is because while we very similarly ask students to complete one Bedrock session for their home learning, we also ask them to do one during tutor time. So it's a bit tight. Our tutor times are 20 minutes and the students typically need to spend 20 minutes on a Bedrock session, but they're in the routine now. They get into tutor, their phones are out, their headphones are in, and they're on Bedrock Learning. And we've enjoyed that, not just from an English teacher tutor perspective, but across the school, because should the students come across anything that they're not too sure of, or even on the other hand, when they come across a word that they're really excited to have learned, they've got that adult in the room that they can have that conversation with. And we've noticed the oracy of their conversations improving massively, which is a thing we weren't expecting to see. It's just been a real added bonus. So that's what the benefit of the literacy team has been for us. And then the other thing that we really wanted to focus on was praise. And just before this started, we were talking about how we focus so much on the students that aren't doing things rather than the students that are. So because we hadn't had any literacy initiatives before, we were lucky to start, well, we've only started Bedrock this year, but we were lucky to get it a couple of months before the summer holidays because our timetable changes in the June. So we made it voluntary for students and we made it a competition. And we were giving students this summer competition to accrue as many points as they could on Bedrock Learning. And we've rewarded that with just simple recognition points for a lot of the students, but also certificates and vouchers that they can then spend for the top 3 prizes. So we were really lucky, and I think it helped us hit the ground running, that before we were monitoring students and checking that they were doing it on a weekly basis, we opened it up to them on a really fun and inviting sort of platform that they were really keen to gain points, they were keen to compete with their peers, and it just created that enjoyment element to it rather than us, as we are now, checking them on a weekly basis to make sure that it's been done as part of their home learning. And it's paid its dividends. Our first term's usage was over 80%, which was something that we weren't expecting to see until the summer term. So we've been really, really fortunate there that we've hit the ground running with that competition, and we're trying to keep up with that praise rather than the recognition of those that aren't doing it all of the time. So every week, English teachers tend to take most of the responsibility for it in their English lessons, but English teachers will read through who's got so many points, and we use the Bedrock competitions for the 140 points, constantly referring back to that. You only need 20 more points to enter into the Bedrock competition. And we've got you might use a different platform, but we've got Sims, so we've added a recognition point, a praise point for Bedrock Learning. And if the students have done their 1 tutor session and their 1 home learning session, they get their Bedrock recognition point on Sims. And of course, their Sims points then add up to bigger prizes for them within the school as well. So it's heavily incentivized, but it's working really well. And it's creating that positive atmosphere rather than creating that almost chore-like atmosphere that we didn't want to try and lead it to, where it's a punishment if you haven't done it. The only other thing I can say that we have done to try and combat that almost negativity towards it is that when students don't complete their Bedrock learning session, they come for a catch-up session rather than a detention, and they'll complete the Bedrock session with a member of staff. So they've got laptops or their phones in the school and they'll complete it with us. And it's quite nice because although they're a bit reluctant to come and join, you can see that they're really enjoying the session. And I think that's pretty much everything we've done so far to get Bedrock running in our school, and it's worked really, really well.
Great, thank you, Sophie. I just cropped into my mind Jeff Barton. He's always cropping into my mind, and he said sort of literacy, we shouldn't call it literacy anymore, actually. We should call it high quality teaching and learning. And I think what both of you are talking about there is just high quality teaching and learning, and you bring it into the classroom with your tier 2 slides, with your Bedrock lessons, Charlotte, and it's just really, really great to see. I don't know if anyone has seen our wintry resources, but using things beyond the Bedrock lessons is really great, and makes students make those links. One thing before we move on, I know, Sophie, you mentioned that students are now actually being able to understand instructions a bit better. Did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, definitely. So when we did that initial collation of the tier 2 vocabulary that other staff wanted to see for their department schemes of work, we also took a look at sort of basic instructional terms that we give to students all of the time, and we've made those into tier 2 slides as well. But as I said before, that didn't really hit the mark. They've continued to be used in the schemes of work in which they were already embedded. But since we've started using Bedrock, and we've been using it since June, July, so in that short space of time, we've already noticed that our students are able to express themselves a little bit better. Their conversation is more eloquent. They're better at expressing the point that they're trying to make. But also our instructions in the way that we deliver hasn't changed, but their comprehension of those instructions has. And it's across the whole sort of cohort. We use Bedrock for all of Key Stage 3. So it's not perhaps to suggest that, you know, they've gone up a year group, so their maturity has enabled them to understand that better. But we have seen across the entire cohort of Key Stage 3 that their oracy, their understanding of instructions, their emotional literacy in expressing themselves, it's being heard around school site. And it wasn't something we were expecting in the slightest, but it's been really, really pleasant to observe. And we've had other members of staff coming to us as English teachers to let us know that they've heard these conversations. They've heard students discussing keywords as well, which is absolutely incredible. We've got a tiny screen in one of our corridors in our blocks, and it has a cycle of a word of the week that we pick every week. And Charlotte, we were talking about word of the weeks becoming a bit gimmicky, and that was something we really wanted to avoid. So every week, using Bedrock's word trends, we have a word of the week per year group, and they're walking around school site and they're discussing what the word of the week means this week and where they're going to try and use it. And the feedback that we're getting then from the hearsay of staff just really shows that that's all working for us.
Great, and that's all part of that community. Ellie, did you want to add on some of the strategies you found useful? Any top tips for people out there?
Yeah, so we implemented Bedrock in 2018 when that's when we first purchased it, and we had this sort of long, arduous journey of making Bedrock more successful. And I think the best thing that we did for literacy was actually shift it from being the focus on the children, but more about the teachers and their understanding of Bedrock, their understanding of literacy, the buy-in again of like reading ages, just like Charlotte mentioned, and them understanding actually what that meant. Because I think sometimes seeing 7 and 8 months on a screen is all very well and good, but not actually understanding what that means for the child, and showing teachers what text a 7-year-old reads compared to their textbooks and stuff like that really made teachers think, oh my goodness, I need to do something about it. So we used to do things like we had reading journals that when we went into lockdown, it was a virtual reading journal, and so we challenged students to read 100 books before they left the school, and we sort of had that, and they got stamps when they read the books, and they also had a section in that reading journal to write down their Bedrock vocabulary, and they took it around with them with their planners, and they used to have them open in their lessons, and they'd highlight when they used their Bedrock words within the classroom as well, which was something that was brought their sort of homework that they were doing at home into the classroom and made them appreciate that the language they were using was actually really, really important. And again, that was something that the parents could then sort of look at, and we really then started to focus on the parents and their engagement with Bedrock, and sending out mail merge letters with the access codes, and every parent's evening being like, have you signed up for Bedrock, and having the iPads so they could do it there and then, just to really triangulate what we were doing in school and what they were doing at home, because sometimes it is difficult for them to know, well, what should I focus on at home, how do I help them, and actually giving them that tool to help them at home was something that really, really helped us help the children in school.
And actually, once the parents link, they get an email just before their homework's due in, so it's a nice nudge. And actually, they don't have to log onto the dashboard for that. There is one that. Sorry, you go.
Yeah, and the other thing that we sort of did as well to sort of encourage that in the home is we had this sort of set of oracy sentence stems for how to talk about the words, and we used to set little challenges. They used to go home in our newsletters. It used to be part of their sort of what was sent to parents about how to use particular words in conversation, so that then it just sort of continued that language richness outside of school, because it's all very well us doing it from 8 till 4, but then once they go home into the sort of wider world, that's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, as part of my master's, I was doing sort of something about parent and school. Well, I know parent and school relationships, and created talking prompts that are linked to Bedrock. So if anyone's interested in that, we can send those across as well. But yeah, giving them a framework to work with as well. So we do have a couple of questions. So before we move on, there was a question for Charlotte. Was that Ruth Miskin?
Yes, Ruth Miskin. The title of it evades me now, but it was recommended to one of my friends who works at Fulford High School in York. Ruth Miskin phonics.
Is it
Ruth Miskin phonics.
read write ink?
Yes.
Yeah, we used to use it with our low ability children, and it really did actually have such a massive impact on them because
Yeah.
it gave them confidence. And we used to do it in really, really small groups, and then they'd graduate from Ruth Miskin into a program called Direct Instruction,
Yeah.
which was similar, and that just gave them so much confidence in themselves, which was lovely to see.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So Ruth Miskin. And then the word of the week based on year group word trends. Is there a way to access the word trends without having that is in the pipeline, isn't it, Ellie?
Yeah, so that is something that we get asked quite a lot. So it is going to be something that we're doing as part of our sort of development of vocabulary, because we recognise we want to make sure that Bedrock vocabulary is so useful in the classroom. We want to make it easier to make it useful. So yeah, that will be something, and we will sort of communicate that when that is ready.
Excellent. I should also say Ellie's, doing amazing work with Bedrock grammar and Bedrock morphology. But obviously we can discuss that another time. But yeah, you all mentioned oracy and the confidence students have reading out loud and speaking amongst each other. So it's not surprising that in the recent Oxford language report, lots of the case studies that were outlined, if you haven't seen it, it's really worth read, mentioned oracy as really, really crucial, along with, having a reading community and all of those things that you're all doing. But so I thought I'd just signpost Voice 21. Have any of you heard of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts, Charlotte?
So am I right in thinking there's schools that are Voice 21 in London?
So yeah, Voice 21 was first piloted in a school called School 21 in Stratford, but now actually it's a sort of a charity or organisation that go into schools and boost oracy in schools. So it's almost like they go in and then help train teachers, get students excited about it. So yeah, I just thought that was quite interesting to share. I know Ellie, you were mentioning. I actually should say, it's a bit of a name drop, but I used to work with the head teacher at School 21, and she was a language teacher. So it kind of doesn't surprise me that, communication skills was sort of top of her priority. Yes, and then this is another one. The idea that actually regular celebration of students' progress, just like you said, Sophie, is vital as well, and that's why we have the half-termly prizes as well. Right, in terms of next steps, to make students more word conscious, when you're talking about, students talking about those words around school, it sounds like they are all, on the way to becoming more and more word conscious. But, what are your next steps? Charlotte, do you want to start us off?
So I'll start by saying kind of what Sophie said. I think when I took over with the Bedrock, it was what Sophie said. You're kind of banging this drum about the focus is on the ones that aren't doing it. And we've kind of flipped our mindset a little bit over the past year, and we are celebrating, and it's something that we're trying to build more of. So our next step is to make sure we're continuing this. We do the Bedrock competitions. I said to yourself, Alex, when we chatted last week, that I think the point system has been revolutionary on there. Having those leaderboards. Like Sophie said, all of our English staff get Bedrock up at try to at the beginning of every lesson and show the leaderboard, show the points. We follow your competitions, but we also have in-house competitions. So we've got our own 140 point competition running at the moment. We will celebrate classes, so the best class, but then also the best students. And then I think one of the big things we've done is we've got, I don't know if any other schools have done it. It was in a book called Everyone Succeeds, I think it is, about the Lapel badges. So we have Lapel badges that they achieve with their attitude to learning. So bronze, gold and silver. Or bronze, silver and gold if you're going to go in the right hierarchy. And we have introduced a Bedrock lapel badge, and it's a beautiful star badge with the word Bedrock in it, and they're very coveted. We only gave out 5 last year, and again there won't be that many this year. And they're given them in an assembly by the head teacher. And they're really excited by them. You know, we had a young boy in year 7 last year. He could have won an Amazon voucher. He could have been given, I don't want the Amazon voucher, miss. I don't want the chocolate. I want the badge. So, you know, they were really excited by it. And something that I've introduced this week, actually, as requested from the head teacher because of the success we're having with Bedrock, is a Bedrock newsletter. Because we obviously get the report, the monthly report, but there's some really good stuff on there. Now, GDPR, I'm waiting to see if we can put full names of students on there. But it was really quite nice putting this newsletter together that will go home to parents. And I think it's what Ellie's saying, is bridging the gap between home and parents, because our parents are very reluctant. So again, one of our next steps is to think about how we get parents more involved and more engaged with what we're doing in school. Because a lot of our students are from disadvantaged backgrounds who go home and they're not challenged with the way that they talk or the way that they write. And then the oracy thing, we're also building in to make them more word conscious through the teaching and learning. We're looking at structured conversation, because we know that good thought precedes good writing. If you can't explain yourself eloquently, how can you be expected to write an essay on what you're trying to think? So we're looking more. We've been using the writing revolution. I don't know if anybody uses the writing revolution. It's fantastic. And we use it cross-curricular. So we've built it in with history, and now we're building it in with RE and some other subjects. And we all know when we introduce these different aspects of writing, of the writing rev, and part of that is line of argument, and we're getting them to use the oracy before that, very structured conversation. So person A needs to say this with this feedback, etc. And then our reading culture for being more word conscious. We know the reading ages need to improve, and I really like what you said, Ellie, about showing a member of staff what a reading age of age 7 can access. I've not thought of that, and I think that's something we really need to look at doing. But we actually have now a youth fiction book club. Emma Grant, who runs our whole school literacy, she was part of it. I think it was Oxford or some Oxford Open University, I think, or something, where they were talking about how we need to know more about youth fiction as teachers. And I hadn't read a youth fiction book for years, and now I've read about 15 or 20, you know, and we really enjoy it because there's always cake and coffee, always the best way to end a day. But we discuss these books that we can then recommend to students. I've actually got one sat here waiting to read. I've got Heart. I don't know if anyone's read Heartstopper, which is a graphic novel. I'm 33 years old. I've never read a graphic novel in my life, and so I really enjoyed it. And what it means is I can recommend books to students like Black Flamingo that I read. I've just read The Star of the North. And we have scholarly reading at the beginning of every lesson in year 7 to 10 minutes of scholarly reading. And, you know, it's about us. We watch the room. We say, we can tell if you're reading. We know if you're reading. If you're just staring, you know, if your book's upside down or whatever, you're not reading. And we give 4, 3, 2 or 1 for our lessons. So we award a 4 for scholarly reading. But also it's allowed us to look at what they are reading. And there was too many, you know, David Walliams, I said this to you last week, Alex, it has its place. Don't get me wrong, it has its place. Does it have its place in a year 9 classroom? Not so much, especially with a student with a reading age of age 16. So it's allowed us to challenge, you know, what we're reading and becoming more word conscious of that. And again, just next steps, the whole school. We all know what it's like to try and get every member of staff on board. It's really difficult. So it's constant. It's like recall and retrieval, isn't it? It's constantly coming back to it and saying, remember when we spoke about this? Let's look at this again. So we're just being more conscious and making sure that we're using Bedrock. We want staff to know what the words are, but the document's it's full of everything. So we're trying to find a way that we can communicate that with all staff, and then bridging the gap with parents.
Love it. I really like the idea of the youth fiction reading club, because being able to recommend texts, and actually all of these texts are really topical and they deal with really difficult issues. So it opens up that sort of PHSCE discussion as well and builds that cultural capital. Fantastic. Okay, so Sophie, what are your next steps at Crofton School?
So something that started really well, but was all a bit sort of unknown to all of us, was the CPD that we ran for every single member of staff. And in terms of maintaining that whole school staff buy-in to ensure that our students are being made more word conscious, is towards the end of the year, but just before our timetable change, we'd like to re-deliver that sort of initiation training for staff, but to have a review of Bedrock as well as refreshing staff on how to use it. So that's something that we're currently building towards as we scarily approach what will be our timetable change in about 5 months' time. And in terms of keeping up with that positive praise, we have purchased tiny little trophies, and on a half-termly basis, we're going to be issuing those out to students as a class group and as a tutor group for highest progress and points leaderboard. What we're also doing is something that is quite simple and could be quite gimmicky, but so far so good, is based on the sort of feedback that we had from that one little screen that we had in that corridor where the students were all of a sudden discussing their words of the week around the school site, is we've got A4, very simple, really stripped back, but laminated signs, if you like, that say Year 7 word of the week, Year 8 word of the week, and Year 9 word of the week. And where they're laminated, they're quite easily wipeable on a weekly basis. And we're asking staff to nominate one student in their tutor group or in their period 1 class on a rotating week A and B sort of schedule of timetable if they don't have a tutor group, nominating students to be their Bedrock word of the week students. And then on a Monday morning when I come in, because obviously, as you've said, that you're working on the year group trends, I take a look at what the students are accessing the most within a year group, so what blocks they're accessing the most, and pick a word from that block to try and keep up that momentum. So when I send that out on a Monday morning, not only will it be going to our LRC manager, who currently displays them as a slideshow, but it will be going to every member of staff. And then on that Monday morning tutor session or their period 1, they'll spend 2 minutes changing over the word of the week, and that in itself is going to prompt a discussion within the students. And what we're really excited to see is the consistency that the students are going to have in going around the school site, and no matter what lesson they're in, knowing exactly what the word of the week is for their year group. And what we've really enjoyed, and we're continuing to see the benefits of this, and it's opening lots of questions for us for where we go further with Key Stage 4, is that at the moment we don't have Key Stage 4 on Bedrock Learning, and it's something that I know that my department head and I have been in discussion about, but they're still interested in the Key Stage 3 words of the weeks. And typically Key Stage 4 get a bad rap. We think they're disinterested and disengaged, but they are particularly interested in the Key Stage 3 word of the weeks. Why don't I have a word of the week? Well, where can I use this word? And actually that's something that we're quite looking forward to seeing expand on as well. But it is all about keeping up that positive praise and keeping up that momentum. We started really well with the, as Ellie mentioned earlier, the sort of mail merged letters that went home to parents and guardians with access codes to try and give them that ownership on their children as well. And I think that that's something we need to take a look at how we can monitor and re-implement, because parents and guardians get so much information, and to make sure that they're still monitoring their Bedrock learning as well. So we've managed to create some, to avoid sort of the COVID disruption, we've managed to create some videos that go home to parents and guardians that just talk through what we've been doing and talk through launching Bedrock and keeping up that parental engagement, trying to get parents in to have that sort of tutorial of Bedrock learning and what it looks like for their children is something we're looking to do as well to keep that momentum going.
Thank you. I mean, giving a student a board marker, they're very happy with that. That sounds like a great idea. Ellie, did you want to add to this?
I just had something just to add on to what Sophie said. Actually, not from my own experience, but I was actually talking to a teacher from a primary school last week who actually held a virtual Bedrock parent information evening, and they gave loads of. They showed the parents how you logged on, what it looked like for the children, and we're just saying how then all the parents literally signed up in like during the sort of talk, and then all had access to it, could all play on it themselves, see what their child had got up to. And they then have emailed me since then and been like, wow, it's actually really made a big difference because they're being word conscious at home, which is something that I wish I'd been able to do. Obviously I left, so wasn't able to sort of do that, but I think that would have been really powerful. But we did lots of things in school, much like what Sophie's done with the sort of word of the week. Every teacher had a word of the week, and we had also the what the teacher's reading. That was something that we did that I thought was a bit gimmicky. I mean, I printed out all the laminated, spent ages laminating it, thought the children are never going to notice this, but they did. And if I had my book on the board on my door for more than 3 weeks, they'd be like, Miss, you're reading really slowly. And like that kind of engagement with I'm word conscious, I read lots of books too, was really sort of powerful for the children. And we used to read with them in the library, and we made a conscious effort for the teacher to read as well, obviously while monitoring behaviour and things, but just to model that reading behaviour and how to read well was something that we did quite often.
Yeah, I love that. And just coming back to the year 10s and year 11s wanting to have their own word of the week as well. It's I remember once not putting stickers in their books and thinking they won't mind, but they just love stickers, trophies, lapel badges. So yeah, very, very interesting. So just to sort of finish off there, all of you mentioned, you know, the CPD for your staff and staff buy-in. And I think, and that often is kind of how we end these webinars, which are CPDs in themselves. So I just thought I'd end up with that, like, as a really, really good starting point for all teachers, as we all said, not just the English department, to look at what students are reading and what they're expected to write and speak about in their subject, and how to speak about it. It's a really good starting point to sort of close those gaps and to address, you know, some of that learning that was lost in COVID, but also, you know, to press forward and create those language rich communities. We did, here we go, please could some examples of ORC sentence be shared? Yes, I think we've got some sentence stems. I think, Ellie, you've got some, did you say?
I do. I've
Fab.
got them that link to words. Yeah, I've got loads of them, so I can definitely send them across.
Fab. So we'll get those sent across. I did mention the Christmas literacy booklet that's been made. If I was in the classroom now, I would definitely have downloaded that, but we'll share that with you as well, and the talking prompts. Thank you so much, everyone. Did you have anything to add, Sophie or Charlotte?
No, I think I've spoken off.
Never. Sophie?
No, likewise. Also, I think I've said quite enough about what literacy is doing for our school.
Yeah.
But honestly, thank you to Bedrock, because it's been absolutely phenomenal.
Well, thank you, all of you. Honestly, it's been a really, really good discussion today. And yeah, thank you very much. We'll see you next time in January. So have a good Christmas.